Deep in a snow-choked forest, a Navy SEAL on mandatory leave heard something that didn't belong, a train horn, on the wrong night. Through the blizzard, he followed the sound with his loyal canine. What they found on the frozen tracks was unthinkable. A Hells Angels biker, bound, broken, and left unconscious, meant to be erased by steel and silence. The men who planned it trusted the storm to bury the truth. They believed no one was watching. They were wrong. That night, a soldier who had stepped away from war stepped back into it, not to witness an accident, but to stop an execution. A single choice would change everything. Before we begin, tell us where you were watching from. And if stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption move you, hit subscribe. Your support truly means the world. Winter pressed hard against the Idaho pines, snow hissing sideways like ash from a burned sky, the forest breathing cold and old secrets into the dark. Ethan Cole lived where maps lost interest. The cabin sat low among the trees, a squat rectangle of timber and shadow half swallowed by drifts. Its roof bowed like a tired back. At 36, Ethan carried himself with the quiet economy of a man who had learned that wasted motion invited regret. He was tall, just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered not from vanity, but from use, from years of lifting weight that had names like Packer Rifle and Friend. His dark hair was cut short out of habit, already threaded with gray at the temples. A trimmed beard traced a jaw built of angles and restraint. His eyes, steel blue and watchful, rarely settled. People said he was polite, distant. Those who had known him before the quiet knew better. Silence was how he kept the past from spilling. Mandatory leave, the Navy called it. To Ethan, it felt like exile dressed as mercy. The year before had taught him that noise could be survived, but quiet demanded a different courage. He moved through the cabin checking corners out of reflex, then allowed himself to sit, palms warming around a mug that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and pine smoke. Rook lay at his left boot, close enough that Ethan could feel the dog's warmth through leather. 7 years old, German shepherd, black and tan coat dulled by winter and time, muzzle powdered with gray like a dusting of flour. A thin scar split the fur near his left ear. Old, healed, earned. Rook was large without being bulky, lean and efficient, built for endurance rather than display. His amber eyes missed nothing. He was not a pet. He was a partner, shaped by years of soft commands and instant obedience, by nights when trust meant breathing at the same rhythm. Off duty, Rook stayed close to Ethan's left leg as if guarding a space only the two of them understood. Ethan had once joked that Rook was allergic to the word relax. Rook had responded by lowering his head onto Ethan's knee and refusing to move. Humor, Ethan had learned, could be a leash for grief. The storm pressed its knuckles against the windows. Wind found every seam and tested it. This was what leave was supposed to feel like, Ethan told himself. Isolation, stillness, time enough to breathe without counting heartbeats. He closed his eyes and let the quiet settle. It never did. Rook's body stiffened without sound, ears snapping upright, tail lowering, weight shifting forward. Ethan felt it then, not fear, but recognition, the kind that slid into place and made everything else line up. He rose slowly, boots silent on the wooden floor, one hand already drifting toward his jacket. Outside, the storm howled louder, swallowing distance. Beneath it, barely there, came a sound that did not belong. A train horn, long and low. Wrong. Ethan frowned, counting instinctively. The rail line near Huckleberry Pines was old, barely used. One train, every Wednesday, late afternoon. Locals timed their lives by it like a tired heartbeat passing through the valley. This was night, and it was not Wednesday. The horn sounded again, closer now, cutting through the storm like a blade through cloth. Rook let out a low growl from deep in his chest. Not aggression, but warning. Something inside Ethan snapped awake. His heart slowed instead of racing. Thoughts aligned, sharp and clean. He slipped on his outer gear, checked the weight at his side, and reached for the flashlight with the red lens. Survival tools, not weapons. That was the lie he told himself. He crouched beside Rook and rested a hand briefly against the dog's neck, the warmth grounding him. "All right," he murmured, calm and steady, the voice of a man who had followed worse sounds into darker places. "Let's see what doesn't want to be seen." They moved together, the cabin door opening just enough to release them into the storm. Snow swallowed their tracks almost instantly. Man and dog slipped between the trees, low and deliberate. shadows among shadows as the sound of steel on rail drew them downhill. The world narrowed to white and black, to breath and footfall. Rook ranged ahead, nose low, finding purchase where human boots struggled. The horn came again, closer, its vibration traveling through the ground and into Ethan's bones. The tracks emerged suddenly from the snow like a scar, two dark lines cutting through the white. Ethan dropped to a knee behind a fallen pine and scanned the curve ahead. The blizzard thinned just enough for a headlight to appear, a single hard eye sweeping the bend. And then he saw him. A man lay across the rails at an angle that tightened Ethan's chest. Hands bound behind his back with plastic restraints, ankles twisted awkwardly, boots scuffed raw against frozen steel. Snow clung to a black leather jacket, stitched with a familiar winged emblem, its edges frayed by miles and fights. Caleb Cade Mercer, though Ethan would not know the name yet, looked late 30s, maybe 40. He had the heavy build of someone who'd earned strength the hard way, neck thick, shoulders rounded by years hunched over handlebars. His face was rough-hewn, nose crooked as if it had been broken and set badly, beard dark and untrimmed, lips split with dried blood. Tattoos climbed his forearms in faded blues and blacks, stories written by younger hands. He wasn't moving, not good at all. Ethan didn't hesitate. Calculation shut down, replaced by reflex. He broke from cover and sprinted, boots skidding on ice. Rook exploded forward beside him, a streak of black and tan against the white. The train roared closer. Rook reached the man first, jaws working, with practiced precision on the restraints. The sound of snapping polymer vanished into the storm. Ethan dropped to the rails, hooked his arms beneath the man's shoulders, and pulled. Cade was heavier than he looked, and lighter than he should have been. That thought came and went as they dragged him clear, Rook bracing, the wind from the oncoming train tearing at Ethan's coat. They rolled into the snowbank together as the train tore past, steel screaming against steel, the world erased by noise and force. Ethan curled his body around the man on instinct, shielding him as the ground shook. Then it was gone. Silence returned like a held breath released. Ethan pushed up, chest heaving, and checked for life. A pulse, fast and weak, breathing, shallow, uneven, hypothermia and shock, at least. He followed Rook's gaze back to the dark curve of track where the train had vanished and felt a prickle climb his spine. Someone had done this. Someone had trusted the storm to hide the truth. Ethan lifted the man, Cade, into his arms and turned for the trees, choosing shadow over speed, trusting the forest to do what it had always done best. Erase traces, hide truths. The storm closed ranks behind them, and the wrong horn faded into memory, leaving only the work ahead. Ethan did not stop moving until the trees swallowed the tracks and the scream of steel faded into the storm, like a bad memory, refusing to stay sharp. Snow clawed at his calves as he pushed uphill, Cade's weight heavy in his arms, awkward and unbalanced the way unconscious men always were. Rook moved ahead and back, a silent metronome of muscle and fur, checking shadow and wind, every sense tuned to the forest's shifting breath. When Ethan finally reached the cabin, his lungs burned with cold and effort, and his shoulders throbbed with the familiar ache of having done exactly what he'd promised himself he would not do on leave. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood, wet wool, and the faint iron tang of blood. Ethan laid Cade on the narrow mattress by the wall, movements precise, almost gentle. Up close, the man's face told a longer story than the jacket ever could. Cade Mercer's skin was weathered and pale beneath the grime, lined early by sun and wind, his beard thick and uneven as if he cut it with impatience rather than care. A fresh bruise darkened his cheekbone, swelling already, and his lower lip was split where someone had hit him hard enough to mean it. He had the look of a man used to pain but unprepared for betrayal, the kind that came from people who knew your name and where you slept. Ethan stripped off his gloves and checked Cade's pulse again, steadying himself with the ritual. Fast. Weak. Hypothermia had its claws in him, and shock wasn't far behind. Ethan lit the stove with practiced efficiency, the flame catching with a soft woof that felt almost indecently loud in the quiet. Rook shook snow from his coat and took position by the door, sitting upright, amber eyes fixed on the dark seam where wood met night. His ears never stopped moving. Cade groaned, a low sound dragged up from somewhere deep, and his eyes fluttered open. Dark brown, bloodshot, sharp, despite the pain. They locked onto Ethan with instant suspicion, the way men learn to look when trust had cost them teeth. Cade's gaze flicked to the room, the stove, the dog, the door. His jaw tightened. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, scraped raw by cold and fear. "Somewhere you didn't die," Ethan said evenly. He stepped back half a pace, palms open, letting the space speak. "Easy. You were on the tracks." Cade sucked in a breath, then hissed as pain answered. His eyes went distant for a second, as if replaying the headlight bearing down on him. When they came back, they were hard. "Figures," he muttered. "They always like clean endings." Rook shifted, placing himself squarely between Ethan and the bed, not threatening, just present. Cade noticed. A crooked half-smile tugged at his mouth and died there. "Good dog," he said hoarsely, as if testing whether kindness still worked in this room. Ethan fetched a blanket and wrapped Cade with care that did not invite gratitude. "You want to tell me why someone thought a train would solve their problem?" Cade laughed once, sharp and humorless, then coughed. "Because it looks like bad luck. Storm, wrong night, nobody asks questions." He paused, swallowing. "And because I stopped being useful." The words hung between them, heavy as wet snow. Ethan studied him, reading posture and tone the way he once read terrain. Cade's shoulders were tight, not with bravado, but with a coiled animal caution. This was a man used to rooms where violence was a language everyone spoke, and mercy was considered a dialect for fools. "They didn't do this for fun," Ethan said. "No," Cade agreed. "They did it because I said no." He shifted, wincing, then forced himself upright enough to meet Ethan's eyes. "Name's Caleb Mercer. Cade, Hell's Angels if the jacket didn't give it away." He said it without pride, without apology, just a fact, like weather. "Been riding since I was 19. Thought loyalty was the same thing as family." His mouth twisted. "Turns out family's the first to sell you cheap." Ethan felt the familiar tug of something like sympathy and shut it down. "Why tonight?" "Because tonight I had something they couldn't buy back." Cade's gaze slid to the door, then to Rook, then back to Ethan. He lowered his voice. "I've got evidence." "Not on me." Ethan waited. Silence was a tool. "There's a card," Cade continued. "Memory card. Video, ledgers, names. Stuff that makes powerful people nervous." His hands trembled. Whether from cold or memory, Ethan couldn't tell. "I hid it before they grabbed me, near an old sawmill. Places half collapsed, buried in snow. I figured if I didn't make it, at least it wouldn't vanish with me." Rook let out a low, thoughtful huff, as if filing the information away. Ethan exhaled slowly. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls leaning in with interest. "Who's they?" Cade's eyes hardened. "Men who smile in daylight, shake hands, donate to churches, and men who ride under my colors and forget what loyalty means when money starts talking." He looked away. "I'm not a good man, Ethan. I've done things I don't brag about, but I wasn't going to be part of this." Something in his voice shifted there. Not self-pity, not heroism, resolve, brittle but real. Ethan recognized it. It was the sound of a line drawn late but drawn all the same. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows like impatient fingers. Rook's ears angled forward. Somewhere beyond the trees, an engine noise carried briefly, then vanished. Ethan met Rook's gaze and felt the quiet tighten again. The wrong horn had not been an accident, and storms, he knew, rarely came alone. "Get some heat back," Ethan said at last. "We'll talk more when you stop shaking." He turned to bank the stove, mind already arranging distances and angles, memory laying maps over snow. He had wanted rest. The mountain had given him purpose instead, and purpose, once found, was a hard thing to refuse. The fire in the stove burned low, its light thin and wavering, casting long shadows that bent and breathed against the cabin walls as if the room itself were listening. Cade sat hunched on the edge of the mattress, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, steam rising faintly from damp leather. The gun lay back on the table now, untouched, where Ethan had quietly slid it out of reach without comment. Rook remained between them, unmoving, his posture neither aggressive nor relaxed, simply absolute. Cade watched the dog with the wary respect of a man who understood predators, then dragged a hand down his face. His fingers shook, and not just from the cold. "I don't scare easy," he said, his voice low and gravelly, worn down by years of shouting over engines and wind. "But that train was meant to make a point." He swallowed, jaw flexing. "They wanted me erased. No bitty, no questions. Just a story people tell themselves so they can sleep." Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, giving Cade space while keeping the angles covered. His face revealed little, but his eyes tracked every movement, every shift of tone. He had learned long ago that truth rarely arrived clean. It bled first. Cade took a breath and began to talk. The words came slow at first, then steadier. As if once spoken, they could no longer turn back. He told Ethan about the deal he'd been pressured into. A transport route hidden behind charity events and winter supply runs. Money washed clean through shell companies and local favors. At the center of it all was Vince Harland, a name spoken with the careful bitterness reserved for men who wore righteousness like a tailored coat. Harland was in his late 50s, tall and broad through the chest with a permanent stoop that made him seem approachable, almost humble. His silver hair was always combed back, his beard trimmed close to hide the softness beneath his jaw. He smiled easily, especially for cameras, and spoke in a calm, practiced cadence that made people trust him before they realized they had. "He doesn't raise his voice," Cade said, staring into the fire. "Never has to. People listen anyway." Cade admitted his own part without flinching. He had ridden escort, enforced debts, scared people who needed scaring. The leather jacket wasn't a costume. It was armor he'd learned to live inside. But something had changed months ago. After a job went wrong and a witness died in a crash everyone agreed was an accident. Cade had seen the footage later, grainy, shaky, undeniable, and it had lodged in his chest like a shard of ice that wouldn't melt. "I started asking questions," he said quietly. "That was my mistake." The memory card had come to him almost by accident, slipped into his hand by a frightened runner who didn't know what else to do. Cade had hidden it, moved it twice, memorized the path to the abandoned sawmill like a prayer he recited when sleep wouldn't come. He hadn't trusted anyone with it, not even the brothers he'd bled beside. Trust had become a currency he could no longer afford. Ethan listened without interruption, the fire popping softly between them. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old calculation running beneath the surface. Judgment was a luxury for men who hadn't seen how choices narrowed under pressure. What mattered was what Cade did next. Outside, the wind eased for a moment. In that brief quiet, Ethan caught the faint sound of an engine far off, then another. Headlights swept dimly through the trees before vanishing. Rook's ears pivoted, his body tense by a degree most men would never notice. Ethan noticed. Cade did too. "They're looking," Cade said. Fear was there, but beneath it something harder had formed, resolve sharpened by the knowledge that running only delayed the inevitable. Ethan straightened. "Then we don't give them what they expect." He moved to the window, scanned the darkness, then began checking gear with efficient calm. The decision wasn't dramatic, it was simply made. He would help retrieve the card, not because Cade deserved saving, but because the truth did. Cade stared at him, disbelief crossing his battered face. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," Ethan replied. Rook shifted, tail thumping once against the floor, as if in agreement. The fire crackled lower. The cabin settled around them. Outside, winter pressed close, patient and unblinking. Inside, three lives aligned on a narrow edge, and none of them pretended the path ahead would be clean. Morning arrived without warmth. The light was thin and colorless, filtering through clouds like paper held over a flame, while snow continued to fall in soft, relentless sheets that erased edges and softened sound. Ethan left Cade at the cabin, with blankets tucked tight and the stove banked low, his voice steady but unyielding when he said, "Don't play the hero. Heroes freeze this time of year." Cade nodded, jaw set, the resolve in his eyes tempered by the knowledge that obedience, just this once, might keep him alive. Ethan stepped into the trees with Rook at his side. The dog moved differently in daylight, still silent but more assured, his black and tan coat dusted white, breath steady. Rook was 7, old enough to have learned patience, young enough to trust his legs. Ethan looped Cade's wool scarf around his glove and let Rook scent it once. The dog's posture shifted immediately, head lowering, tail stiffening, focus narrowing. He set off at a diagonal that ignored the easy lines of terrain and favored the truth beneath the snow. The forest thickened as they descended. Wind threaded through the branches, carrying the distant thrum of engines and the metallic whisper of old rails cooling after a night of violence. Ethan kept his pace measured, choosing steps that left little impression, moving from rock to root to packed drift. His beard iced along the jaw. His breath burned. He felt the familiar calm settle, the one that came when purpose took the place of thought. The sawmill appeared like a carcass picked clean. Corrugated metal sagged and rattled. Beams rose like ribs from drifts piled high, and the ground smelled faintly of oil and rot. Rook slowed, circling once, then twice, nose working tight arcs. Ethan dropped to a knee behind a stack of warped pallets and scanned. Two men moved through the open yard, silhouettes cutting the pale ground. They were not professionals. One was heavy-set, early 40s, with a thick neck and a surplus parka stretched tight across his shoulders, beard untrimmed and frosted at the edges. He carried his rifle too low, confidence born of habit rather than skill. The other was younger, leaner, face half hidden by a scarf, eyes darting with the jittery alertness of someone paid to watch a place he didn't understand. Ethan waited for the wind to cover him, then closed the distance in 3 quiet strides. The takedown was brief and controlled, an arm around the neck, pressure applied just long enough to slacken muscle and will. He eased the heavy man into the snow behind a loader, letting White swallow shape and sound. The younger guard turned at the wrong moment. Rook stepped from shadow, not lunging, not barking, just there. Teeth showed. A low vibration rolled from his chest. Panic did the rest. The man stumbled, dropped his rifle, and ran blind into the trees, crashing through brush until the sound thinned and vanished. Rook returned at a whistle. His nose went back to work. He pawed once near a collapsed wall where snow had drifted deep and uneven. Ethan dug with gloved hands until cold bit through fabric and skin, then struck plastic. The memory card lay wrapped in torn cloth, intact, stubborn as truth. He pocketed it inside his jacket and exhaled once, slow and controlled. The lights came on. Beams swept across the yard from the far side of the mill, too many to ignore. Engines idled, voices carried, raised now, organized. Harlan's people moved like a pack, spreading to cut off exits, trusting numbers where skill was lacking. Ethan turned away without hesitation. He and Rook took the slope, choosing stone over snow, crossing a frozen spillway that rang dully underfoot, then climbing into a narrow cut between boulders where footprints failed to hold. They dropped into a hollow where snow lay untouched and deep. Ethan pressed Rook down beside him and scooped snow over their backs, leaving a thin channel for breath. Cold invaded instantly, sharp and merciless, but they did not move. Lights passed close enough that Ethan heard breath, the scrape of boots on stone. "Tracks disappear here," a man said. Another cursed. "Fan out!" Rook trembled once, then steadied, discipline overriding instinct. The beam slid on. Snow and shadow did their work. Minutes stretched. Ethan counted breaths, shallow and even, feeling time elongate into something viscous. When the lights finally receded, he waited longer still, until the forest returned to its ordinary indifference. Extraction was slower. The cold had settled deep now, stiffening joints, numbing fingers. Ethan forced movement, one careful step at a time, angling back toward the ridge. The cabin emerged through the trees like a promise kept. Cade opened the door before Ethan knocked. Relief broke across his face, unguarded, then quickly reined in. He took in Ethan's iced beard, the dog's snow-caked coat, the tension that still hummed in the air. Ethan produced the card and set it on the table. Cade stared at it, then closed his hand around the plastic as if it might evaporate. Rook shook snow from his coat and settled near the stove, finally allowing his body to rest. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing through him now that the hunt had ended. Outside, winter pressed on, patient as ever. Inside, the truth had been taken back, and the cost of keeping it loomed just beyond the door. Ethan set the memory card on the table between them, a small rectangle of plastic that seemed too light to carry the weight it held. Cade took it with both hands. They trembled, not from the cold this time, but from the sudden, terrifying idea that there might be a way out. He turned it over once, as if checking whether it was real, then closed his fingers around it and let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "I've never had a door," he said quietly, "just exits that closed behind me." They didn't argue about running. Winter made liars of men who believed distance could save them. Ethan packed with the calm of habit, choosing only what mattered. Rook watched from the doorway, posture alert, tail still. When the cabin door shut behind them, the forest accepted their footprints without comment. Ray Walker's ranger station sat at the edge of a clearing, like a weathered sentry that had forgotten why it stood. Ray himself answered the knock with a shotgun angled down, eyes steady and assessing. Early 40s, tall but slightly stooped, he carried the kind of leanness that came from years of solitary patrols and missed meals. His sandy hair was thinning at the crown. His beard was uneven, more practical than styled. Grief had etched lines at the corners of his eyes. 10 years ago, a highway accident had taken his wife, and the mountains had taken him in return. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with a quiet certainty that made others fall into step. Ray took in Ethan's iced beard, Rook's snow-dusted coat, and Cade's battered leather with equal attention. He nodded once and locked the door behind them. "Storm's favoring the loud tonight," he said. "That means trouble likes to talk." He ushered them in and pulled the thick wooden shutters across the windows, then keyed the radio with practiced fingers. Trouble didn't wait. Headlights flared at the tree line, sweeping the clearing like search beams in fog. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, smooth and confident, pitched to sound reasonable. Vince Harlan stepped into the light where he could be seen, tall, broad-shouldered even under winter gear, silver hair darkened by snow, beard trimmed neat. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He held a gloved hand up, a preacher's gesture. "No one needs to get hurt," he called. "We're here to correct a misunderstanding." The first shot shattered a window. Glass sprayed across the floor, snow blowing in behind it. The station answered with noise and motion, wood splintering, bullets biting beams. Ethan moved on instinct, placing himself between Cade and the radio, firing controlled bursts to keep shadows honest. Ray worked the radio through the chaos, voice clipped and precise, calling for immediate extraction. Rook planted himself in the doorway, hackles raised, a low thunder rolling from his chest that dared anyone to cross the threshold. A round caught Ethan high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain bloomed hot and blinding. Cade was there instantly. The man who had lived by his fists now used them to pull Ethan back, to brace him against the wall, to press hard and sure against the wound. Cade's face was set, jaw locked, fear present but mastered. He held the door with Ray, reloading with hands that had learned steadiness the long way. "I've got you," he said, and meant it. Harlan's voice hardened over the speaker. "Last chance," he said. "Walk out alone, and I end this." He laughed softly, as if amused by his own patience. Another blast shook the station. The floor trembled. Smoke and splintered pine filled the room. Then the sound came, deep, rhythmic, unmistakable, rotor blades. The clearing lit white as spotlights cut through snowfall. Rook barked once, not alarm, but confirmation. Outside, engines revved in confusion. Men shouted. Harlan turned, the mask slipping as panic crept into his movements. He ran for the trees. A single shot cracked the air. Snow swallowed whatever followed. The forest kept its verdict. The aftermath narrowed to breath and blood, and the steady hands of people who knew what mattered. Ethan was loaded onto a stretcher under the wash of the helicopter lights, snow hissing as it melted on hot metal. Cade climbed in without asking permission. No one stopped him. Rook followed, settling close, his warmth a solid anchor against Ethan's leg. Days later, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet. Cade stood by the window, leather replaced by a borrowed jacket that hung awkwardly on his frame. In daylight, his face looked older, softer around the eyes, as if the fight had been holding something together that could finally loosen. He watched Ethan sleep, then turned to Rook and rested a hand on the dog's head. "I don't get to be clean," he said to no one, "but I get to be better." The memory card did the rest. Names fell, doors opened. Harlan's network unraveled under its own weight. Ray offered Cade work at his small garage. Honest hours, cold mornings, a place to put his hands to use without hurting anyone. Cade took it, cut his hair shorter, chose a different name for the first time in his life. Winter lingered. Loss did too. But in the small room where Rook lay with his head on Ethan's boots, there was something more warmer than fire, the chance to begin again. Not redemption as a miracle, but as work. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or light tearing open the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wearing worn boots, carrying old scars, or walking beside us on 4 steady legs. This story is not about perfect people. It is about broken ones who chose not to turn away when silence felt safer than truth. A man who had every reason to rest stepped back into the storm. A dog refused to look away. And another man, once lost, chose to stand instead of run. Perhaps God does not always calm the storm around us. Perhaps He sends someone into it to remind us that courage is love in action, that redemption is not a single moment, but a series of hard, honest choices, and that even the coldest winters cannot extinguish a heart willing to change. In our daily lives, we may never face a train in the snow or men with guns in the dark, but we all face moments when doing what is right costs us comfort. Moments when fear whispers, walk away. Moments when helping someone feels undeserved, inconvenient, or risky. May this story remind you that your choice, however small, can become someone else's miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or what this story meant to you. And if stories of courage, faith, and second chances bring light to your days, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them together. May God bless you and protect you. May He guide your steps through every storm. And may you never forget that you are seen, you are loved, and you are never walking alone.